and welcome to History House. I'm your host, Owen Delaney. Let's begin. Today, we will be talking about one of the most famous love stories from South Asia, but one that I also think is little known outside of this region. The story of Anarkali and her lover, Prince Salim, later the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. A tale that has been retold countless times in literature, music, and Bollywood movies. Before discussing this story in detail, I think a background to India/Pakistan of the late 1500s to early 1600s is required. At this time, the dominant power of the region was the Mughal Empire, a state that spanned the northern part of the subcontinent and, at its territorial height in 1707, would control about 90% of the entire region. It was founded by the Emperor Babur, meaning tiger or panther in Persian, in 1526, an emir who was a descendant of the Central Asian conqueror Timur and more distantly of the Mongol Emperor Genghis Khan. The name Mughal literally means Mongol in Persian. The state religion of the empire was Islam, but owing to the diverse ethnicities and beliefs in its lands, it would extend varying degrees of toleration to its populations, which overwhelmingly consisted of Hindus, but also Buddhists, Jains, and others. Indeed, the Mughal Emperor Akbar the Great would practice a belief system called Din-e-Ilahi, the religion of God in Persian, which has been interpreted by some scholars as a syncretic faith, blending tenets from Islam, but also Hinduism and even Christianity. Further, even though the official language of the state was Persian, introduced largely by Babur's son, Humayun, who was exiled for a time at the Safavid court in Iran, Hindi was largely spoken in northern India, with various other languages present in southern India, and the Persian spoken at court would later evolve into Urdu, the most commonly spoken language in modern-day Pakistan. Akbar, who reigned from 1556 to 1605, is generally viewed as the dynasty's most capable ruler, and was the grandfather of Shah Jahan, meaning King of the World in Persian, who built the Taj Mahal as a tomb for his wife Mumtaz Mahal, a love story that deserves an episode of its own, and was the father of Prince Salim, the future Emperor Jahangir, meaning Conqueror of the World in Persian, who reigned from 1605 to 1627. Prince Salim had a famously difficult relationship with his father, the Emperor Akbar, and would rebel against him in 1600. Although unsuccessful, Salim was not executed, even though there continued to be bad blood between father and son, until some sort of reconciliation was achieved shortly before Akbar's death in 1605. It's clear here that there was a troubled relationship between father and son, with the supposed affair between Prince Salim and the legendary Anarkali serving as another blot in the already fragile relationship between Akbar and Prince Salim. So let's turn to Anarkali. The first question, of course, is who was she and what do the sources say about her? This woman, whose name means pomegranate blossom in Persian, is a figure from Mughal history with different identities across accounts by different authors. According to both William Finch, an English merchant in India who died in 1613, and Edward Terry, a chaplain to Sir Thomas Roe, the first English ambassador to the Mughal Emperor from 1616 to 1619, she was a wife of the Emperor Akbar. However, in both records, it is noted that she had an illicit relationship with Prince Salim. Finch and Terry are our earliest sources for this supposed relationship, being nearly contemporaneous, but both have different versions about how their affair unfolded. While on a visit to Lahore, the then capital of the Mughal Empire, today in modern Pakistan, Finch saw, quote, a fair monument for Dun Shah, his mother, one of the Akbar, his wives, with whom it is said that Shah Selim had to do. Her name was Imakyu Kile, or pomegranate kernel, upon notice of which King Akbar caused her to be enclosed quick within a wall in his mohol, where she died, and the king, Jahangir, in token of his love, commands a sumptuous tomb to be built of stone in the midst of a 4-square garden, richly walled, with a gate and divers rooms over it. Of course, the English used here is very old, but essentially it is saying that upon discovering the affair between Anarkali and Prince Salim, Akbar ordered her to be enclosed within a wall, where she tragically starved to death. And when Jahangir became Mughal emperor, he built a tomb as a symbol of his undying love for her. We will return to the supposed burial place later on in this episode. On the other hand, Terry, writing not long after Finch, around the 1600s, wrote that, quote, Akbar Shah had threatened to disinherit the present king, Jahangir, for abuse of Anarkali, that is, pomegranate kernel, his most beloved wife, but on his deathbed repealed it. It is interesting to note that these earliest accounts do not come from the Mughal court itself, but rather come from outsiders who are only beginning to understand the Indian subcontinent. While it is true that the British, through the East India Company and later the Raj, would later dominate the region, English understanding of the culture and society of these lands was at best limited in the 1610s. An example of this can be seen through the previously mentioned English ambassador to the Mughal court, Sir Thomas Roe, and the presentation of gifts to the Emperor Jahangir. Here, Roe presented Jahangir with a carriage which had been damaged in the crossing from England to India, and while politely accepted by the Emperor, did not go down well in the Mughal court, and did not endear it to this island nation in Europe. Nor did the English understand at the time the highly sought after nature of portraits as ambassadorial gifts, which the Portuguese in Goa had come to adopt. Given the cultural misunderstandings in this regard, it is quite possible that the divergent stories regarding a, quote, Anarkali are based on misinterpretations and hearsay, further demonstrated by the conflicting stories from Finch and Terry. In short, while the tales recounted by these writers could be based on a real person or persons, their accuracy is suspect. In terms of the earliest record from the region about Anarkali, this comes from Kunya Lal, a historian of the city of Lahore, where Jahangir had his court, who mentions Anarkali in his Tarikh-i-Lahore, the history of Lahore, from 1884. Here she is described as a beautiful servant, Kaniz, in Akbar's palace, whose real name was Nadira Begum. The emperor apparently gave her the title Anarkali because of her beauty, and it is implied that Anarkali died of sickness or poisoning, and that a tomb was constructed in the city in her honour. A few years later, Saeed Latif, another historian of Lahore, writing in the later 19th century, about 300 years after Anarkali is said to have lived, identified her as Nadira Begum, or Sharf-un-Nisa, a member of Akbar's harem. In his retelling of the story, he states that upon smiling at Prince Salim in a mirror, Akbar ordered her to be buried alive, matching with Finch's previously mentioned description. As was highlighted before, there is a tomb in Lahore that is traditionally believed to be the resting place of Anarkali. It is an octagonal shape and is believed to have been constructed either in 1599 or 1615, fitting with the supposed story, and at its centre is a cenotaph, inscribed with a line of poetry from one of the most famous poets in the Persian language, Saudi. In a couplet fitting with the popular image of Anarkali and her deep passion from Prince Salim, it reads in Persian as follows: Ar garman baz binam ruye yari khwesh ra ta kayamat shakar goyam gardgare kirish ra. Ah, could I behold the face of my beloved once more, I would give thanks unto my Creator until the day of resurrection. End quote. As mentioned before, the English traveller William Finch visited this tomb, and while this physical mausoleum and the story appear to hold up in this case, more recent scholarship has challenged this. A. Chagatai, writing in 1981, and Nazir Chowdhury, writing in 2002, both suggested that Finch mistook the names for the gardens surrounding the tomb, Bog-e-Anarkali, Garden of Pomegranates, for the name of the person buried in this tomb, who they identified as Sahib-e-Jamal, a wife of Jahangir, who died in 1599, matching with the suggested date of the tomb. Jahangir, along with many Mughal emperors, would have had multiple wives for strategic reasons, i.e. to forge alliances, one of whom, Noor Jahan, Light of the World, became in effect the power behind her husband's throne, wielding extraordinary influence for a woman of her time, owing to her husband's alcohol and opium addiction. In short, our principal sources regarding Anarkali come from English travellers, who were only just beginning to understand the politics and culture of the region, while accounts from Lahore about her date nearly 300 years later. Further, researchers in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have challenged the notion that her supposed tomb in Lahore contains her remains, and have pointed out the possibility of misunderstanding between the name of the mausoleum's gardens and the individual in this resting place. Given these problems, I believe that it is safe to say that the traditional figure of a, quote, Anarkali did not exist, but could well have been a fusion of different personalities as well as events from the Mughal court of the late 16th to early 17th centuries. In spite of this, the memory of Anarkali continues to be held in high esteem and has been retold in plays and movies, including what is considered among the greatest Bollywood movies of all time, Mughal-e-Azam, The Great Mughal, from 1960. In the second part, we will be shifting from the historical record to describe Anarkali's presence in popular media and exploring the reasons why her story continues to be told and retold in South Asia. For now, though, we'll take a short break. See you all soon. Welcome back. Owing to copyright restrictions, it was not possible to include music from the soundtrack of Mughal-e-Azam, but I have included music, which I hope gives you a feel for Bollywood cinema. Its details can be found in the episode description. Before the break, we were talking about the quote historical Anarkali, accounts about her, and the possibility of this recorded individual being a collection of people and events moulded into a single person. Now, we will discuss Anarkali as understood by millions of people in the Indian subcontinent, in works of fiction, particularly plays and cinema. The first major depiction of Anarkali comes from Imtiaz Ali Taj's play Anarkali, written in 1922, but only published in 1931. Taj, who was born in 1900 in Lahore, was in the process of completing his bachelor's degree at Lahore Government College, and had previously translated William Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, into Urdu. The plot of this play follows 3 acts: love, ishq, dance, ruqs, and death, maut. When a servant girl, Dilaram, is replaced by Anarkali at the court of Akbar, she becomes jealous and plots revenge. When she learns of Prince Salim's relationship with Anarkali, she arranges that mirrors reflect to Akbar Salim's glances at Anarkali while she dances in celebration of the Persian New Year, Nowruz. Outraged, Akbar imprisons Anarkali, and when Salim tries to break her out, rumours spread that he's planning to rebel against his father. Fearful of this, Akbar orders that Anarkali be buried alive. While the play was initially unsuccessful, having been rejected by local theatres, it did help kickstart South Asia's fascination with this figure and would be adapted into a 1928 movie called The Loves of a Mughal Prince, with the role of Akbar being played by Taj himself, a film which was overshadowed by another movie later that year called Anarkali. By the year 1953, India and Pakistan had achieved independence from Britain, at the cost, though, of population exchanges and the deaths of countless people in sectarian violence. Also by that year, another movie called Anarkali was released, which began to capture the public's imagination with this figure, beginning to earn her place as part of the pantheon of Bollywood love stories. Here, Anarkali is named at first as Nadira, blending Saeed Latif's account of her with the popular legend surrounding this individual, and is only given her popularly known title by the Emperor Akbar upon being impressed by her singing. It then follows in much a similar fashion the narrative of Taj's play, except that Salim and Anarkali's romance is publicly revealed when she collapses on Salim's lap, following a dance in celebration of Akbar's birthday. The manner of her demise is also similar to Taj's work, but it is interesting that her supposed tomb in Lahore is emphasised more, something that is important given the shift in political realities when the film was made in 1953. When Imtiaz Ali Taj wrote his play, India and Pakistan were part of the British Raj and had not been separated yet into two separate entities. This had changed when India and Pakistan became dominions of Britain in 1947, before India gained full independence in 1950, followed by Pakistan later in 1956. Given that Taj's play and film are a retelling of Anarkali's story from a, quote, Pakistani point of view, even if it did not yet exist as an entity at that time, and such a concept only existed culturally and religiously, the film of 1953 could be seen as the same story rebranded for an Indian audience. A contrast between Pakistani and Indian, and Urdu and Hindi, although the 1953 film does contain dialogue in Urdu. As such, Anarkali in this context can be seen as a transnational cultural figure whose story is both understood, remembered and celebrated at a time when the political divisions of the region were becoming more entrenched. In spite of the success of this movie, Anarkali's legend would reach new heights with her depiction in 1960's Mughal-e-Azam, The Great Mughal, the most expensive and highest grossing Indian movie up until that time. In this retelling of her tale, which was based on Taj's play, with an added detail of Akbar allowing Anarkali to secretly escape without Salim aware that she is still alive, the role of the female protagonist is played by Madhubala, one of the most successful and admired Indian actresses of all time, and whose performance here is considered by some as among the best in Indian film history. She also had an interesting background, as she herself was born into a conservative Muslim family, did not go to school, and her father strongly disapproved of her career in acting. Further to this, her native language was neither Hindi nor Urdu, but rather Pashto, spoken primarily in the border areas between Pakistan and Afghanistan, far removed from the Delhi of her upbringing. She also tragically passed away at the relatively young age of 36 following a heart attack, presumably a similar age as Anarkali, given the rough dating we have for when she died. In this sense, Madhubala's background can be seen in some ways as mirroring Anarkali's story, a person who is made to feel unwelcome but nonetheless persisted in pursuing her passion and attaining some form of immortality, even in death. Indeed, Madhubala and her co-star Dilip Kumar had had a close relationship in the early 1950s, but by 1960 had gone through a difficult breakup, in which Kumar had forced her to choose between her family or him. Such tensions, however, would not be noticeable even to the eagle-eyed viewer when watching Mughal-e-Azam, but they were very much present behind the scenes. While the 1953 film did contain musical numbers, the songs featured in Mughal-e-Azam have become important works of Bollywood musical history, which continue to be performed and known by millions in India, and to a certain extent beyond. It is as a result of this legacy that it was recently adapted into a musical in 2016. The movie itself contained both Hindi and Urdu dialogue, and importantly became only the fourth Indian movie to be certified for viewing in Pakistan, owing to a ban on Indian films there, with a premiere, naturally enough, taking place in Lahore. Once again, this could be seen as a further demonstration of Anarkali as a transnational figure, uniting different peoples, metaphorically speaking, through a love story, although it should be noted that this viewing only took place in 2006, nearly 50 years after the original release, and more or less coinciding with the film's re-release in colour, which occurred in 2004. Of course, Mughal-e-Azam was not the last depiction of Anarkali in popular media. There was a later film, once again called Anarkali, in 1966, and she is mentioned in Salman Rushdie's 2005 novel Shalimar the Clown. But in many ways, Mughal-e-Azam was an inflection point. If there was a quote before in terms of Anarkali's reception throughout the subcontinent, it was preceding this movie, although she was known by the wider public before 1960, and indeed a Pakistani film called, you guessed it, Anarkali from 1958 is celebrated there in a similar vein as Mughal-e-Azam is hailed in India. However, it is, quote, after Mughal-e-Azam's release in 1960 that her legend reached new heights, making her the celebrated figure she is today in Bollywood and beyond. To conclude, Anarkali, while likely a legendary figure, or a combination of historical figures, is nonetheless held, along with her lover, Salim/Jahangir, in India and Pakistan, as symbols of love, and to some extent, of the Mughal dynasty as a whole. The Mughals are often associated with greatness, opulence, and extraordinary passion. Alongside the legend of Prince Salim, Jahangir, and Anarkali, one need only look at the Taj Mahal, built by Shah Jahan as a mausoleum for his favourite wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died following a difficult childbirth. A popular symbol of enduring love, lasting for eternity, long after the end of the Mughal Empire. A teardrop on the cheek of time, as described by the Bengali Indian writer Rabindranath Tagore, the first non-European to win the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. The images of the protagonists in Mughal-e-Azam have been used in popular culture, from movies to TV shows and art, becoming staples of splendour, and in a very odd twist, have at times become logos and names for various Indian restaurants in order to attract conventional customers intrigued by mystery and trying something new. In my case, I unfortunately did not come across Anarkali's story through the celebrated Mughal-e-Azam, but rather through an Indian and Pakistani restaurant called Jahangir Balti and Tandoor Restaurant in St Andrews in Scotland, where I was studying at the time. That being said, its webpage does retell the story in a similar manner as Mughal-e-Azam, but with an added detail that Anarkali's mother had been a midwife at Jahangir's birth. Of course, the creation of such stories often diverges from the historical record. Jahangir had many wives and was an opium addict, raging alcoholic, and was also capable of great acts of cruelty. After his son, Khusrau Mirza, rebelled against his rule in 1606 and was defeated, Jahangir ordered that his son's followers be impaled through their bowels, forcing him to watch before partially blinding him. This contrasts greatly with his clean-cut image in plays and movies depicting his relationship with Anarkali, and makes him seem more cruel than his father, Akbar, through the legend of Anarkali being bricked up and starved to death. Nonetheless, legends which, while based on some semblance of truth or flat-out fiction, can have consequences both in the present and in terms of shaping history in the future. India and Pakistan are famously rivals both politically and militarily. Yet it is through stories like Anarkali that a shared connection can be seen. Remembering a woman who is often shown as a tragic figure, either starved to death or forced into exile, never to see her lover again. Most importantly though, Anarkali's story is a story of love. It is a deep and passionate relationship, and also complicated, to put it mildly. And if the romance between Anarkali and Salim is complicated, it is also because many relationships, especially in 2025, are too. Given that the day that I'm releasing this episode is Valentine's Day, I want to wish all my listeners, regardless of whether they're in a relationship, married, happily single, or perhaps hoping to finally ask their crush out, a happy Valentine's Day, wherever you are in the world. I've also just released a reel on the History House Instagram page about the history and connection between St. Valentine and Ireland. So if you would like to learn more, it's worth checking out. A lot of the information for this podcast episode comes from a doctoral thesis at Harvard University called Through the Looking Glass, the Narrative Performance of Anarkali by Aisha Dad, PhD. I would encourage anyone wanting to know more about Anarkali to read it, and I will be including this with a link in the episode description, along with a more general reading list about the Mughal dynasty, particularly the emperors Akbar and Jahangir, as well as the actress Madhubala, as her story should definitely be more well known around the world. And with all this said, that's all for today. The next episode, which will be released at the end of March, will also be about a woman, Queen Christina of Sweden, a monarch who defied the norms of her time and, like Anarkali, is known within her own country but deserves to be more well known around the world. I'll be recording the episode from Stockholm for an added experience, and should be able to include some interesting photos to accompany the episode when it is released. Keep an eye on the social media links for History House then. And until next time, keep her lit.